Hey everybody, I think this is module 8 that we're recording this for. Today I'm going to talk about pragmatism, progressivism, and social reconstructionism. It's important that you think of those three philosophies together because pragmatism is a philosophy by which you can live your entire life. Okay, John Dewey is going to be a central pragmatist thinker and was a pragmatist philosopher. Then, when Dewey focused on education, he invented progressivism. Okay, so if you take all the ideas in pragmatism and just focus them on strictly on schooling, you get progressivism. So there's a lot of overlap between those two philosophies. Then, a contemporary of Dewey's, George S. Counts, didn't like the way progressivism was going as it started to get more and more perverted, and he rallied against progressivism and ended up inventing something called social reconstructionism. So we go from pragmatism to progressivism to social reconstructionism. All three of them are closely linked. So when you're trying to remember these 11 philosophies, think of these three as a group. Okay? And starting with this video and the next 6, these are all going to be philosophies or theories of education that do not believe in a single big T truth. Truth is relative to the individual person and mostly his or her experiences. But we'll get into that as we talk about each philosophy individually. So here we go with pragmatism. Okay. To understand pragmatism, you have to understand the word pragmatic. If I called you pragmatic, would you slap me or would you feel like I had complimented you? Being pragmatic means being practical. Practicality is the key to both pragmatism and progressivism. Now, we need to talk about the metaphysics of pragmatism. Remember, metaphysics answers the question, what's the nature of reality? What's real? Okay. If we were teaching this in a face-to-face class, I have a demonstration I always do with the students where I ask for a volunteer. Some unknowing student will raise his or her hand, and I call them up to the front of the class, and I proceed to dance with them. We do a little waltz in front of the class. Okay, because in pragmatism, reality is shaped in the interaction between the person and the environment. So imagine seriously a dance. Okay, you have person A is a person B is the environment, and they interact and they form a dance. Okay, if I'm dancing with one of you, it's going to be very awkward. Okay, if I'm dancing with my wife, it may not look good, but it'll be a little bit more fluid. Different people interact with the same environment in different ways. Or if you take the same person and put him or her in different environments, the reality is going to change. Okay? So for the metaphysics of pragmatism, it's the interaction between the person and his or her environment. It's shaped in that interaction. So if you change either one of those mechanisms or parts of that interaction, you're going to change the reality of the situation. Okay? Now, for the epistemology, how do you come to learn? That is a fairly easy question in pragmatism. You got to do stuff. In this way, it's kind of like realism. You know, remember we talked about Miss Frizzle, get out there, get messy. For pragmatism, you have to interact with the environment. It's the interaction that forms reality, and it's the interaction through which that you learn. Okay, so in a pragmatic classroom, or if you're a pragmatic teacher, you're going to want the students to interact with whatever it is they're supposed to be learning. Now for axiology, what is of value? There's a really weird answer to that for pragmatism. Basically, if it works, it must be valuable. So what's valuable for me might not be valuable for you, and vice versa. If it's practical and works for the individual, it then has value. It sounds kind of like a cop-out explanation, but that's how pragmatists would approach axiology. For curriculum, a pragmatic teacher would use a lot of hands-on learning, a lot of experiential learning, a lot of getting out into the community. They would use the scientific method, a lot of experimentation. Oh, let's try this, see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, let's learn why it failed. That kind of teaching. There are several people that can be contributors to pragmatism. Dewey's obviously one. We're going to talk more about him in progressivism. But before Dewey, there was a guy named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a French philosopher who wrote a great book called Emile. And basically in this book, what happens is Emile's this little boy, and he just kind of runs around, does little boy stuff, and he's followed by a tutor. Well, the tutor in the story is actually Emile, or Rousseau. So what happens is the little boy runs around, has his little adventures, and let's say he is riding a horse and falls off. Well, the tutor, boom, pops in and explains to him, what happened, how you should ride better. And what he does is he takes advantage of the child's experiences and these educable moments and teaches the kid as the kid naturally develops and wants to learn. And that kind of laid the basis for the child-centered education that Dewey will bring in the progressivism. Okay, so Rousseau's a huge name in the development of educational philosophy. Remember I mentioned John Locke back in the realism about the tabula rasa? That same kernel of an idea applies within pragmatism too. Because if experiences shape who you are and construct your reality, when you're initially born, you don't have any experiences. So you are a blank slate from a pragmatic point of view, a tabula rasa. So the ideas of Locke and Bacon come back in here as well. The perceived weaknesses for pragmatism would be the relativity of truth. How could you focus on practicality as your definition of reality and value? Some people totally reject that. And I think that might be all the time I'm going to spend on pragmatism, because remember, pragmatism is going to overlap a lot with progressivism, and progressivism is gigantic in education. It's one of the 2 or 3 major philosophies, probably the most dominant philosophy in public ed. All right, have a great day. Bye.